so that everyone gets in, and then we will get started. Again, welcome everyone. We are just going to wait a minute or two and then get started. Thank you for coming.
Awesome. Looks like most of the candidates are here. We're waiting for the green candidates.
Welcome everyone. We're just waiting for everyone to log in, and then we will get started.
To get this thing to fit properly. Now, I wonder if we can turn on that light. See how it looks.
Welcome everyone. We're just gonna wait another minute and then we'll get started. Thank you.
I need to center myself.
For those who just joined in, we're just gonna wait another minute and then we'll start it, probably at 6:05.
Ray, can you try the other color, please? The other brighter thing and see how it looks.
Hello, everyone. Welcome. Hope you can all hear me and see me. I'm just going to ask our technical people to make sure that we've got the correct settings here. Yeah, I think now we're good. Okay, I'm going to get started. It's 6:06, so good evening, everyone. Welcome to our 2021 Canadian election special for the riding of Vancouver Centre. Just one sentence in Farsi. با درود به همه شرکت کنندگان گرامی. Thank you for joining us. My name is Shervin Shariari, or Shervin. I am a Langara School of Management instructor, and I will be our independent moderator tonight. If all goes well, we aim to end the session by 8 p.m. This online meeting has been put together by Saraya Iran and Tech Talk with the objective of informing the public and specifically encouraging more Iranian Canadian participation in the election process. We have Mr. Abbas Sedqi, Secretary General of Saraya Iran here. And we also have Mr. Amir Bajakian from both organizations and Mr. Mohsen Wafaduz from Tech Talk. And they have been helping with the organization of this event. Before we get started, I would like to encourage all participants to vote on September 20th, 2021, or on one of the advanced voting days. Please check elections.ca for more information. At this point, I would like to extend a warm welcome to our Vancouver Centre candidates. We were just notified, I believe, a couple of hours ago that unfortunately, Harry Cockle, the Conservative Party candidate, will not be with us tonight. But we will carry on. We are fortunate to have Hedy Fry, the incumbent candidate from the Liberal Party, and I see Breen Ouellette, the NDP candidate. Welcome, both of you. And do we have Alaric Paivarinta from the Green candidate? Are we missing Alaric here?
Yeah, I believe he's.
I'm sorry?
I believe he's not here. I can't see him. One moment, he's calling me.
Maybe he's having difficulty getting in.
Yeah, he's not going to be here.
Okay, so we'll just carry on maybe a shorter evening with Hedy Fry and Breen Ouellette, the Liberal and NDP candidates. Again, welcome to both of you. I'll just go over the agenda really quickly and then we can get started. And I hope you don't mind if I address both of you are candidates by your first names. First, we will do an opening introductory question. Then we will move on with questions on the topics of COVID-19, economic recovery, climate change, and foreign policy. For the opening questions, you will have 2.5 minutes and then 2.5 minutes for the other questions. At the end, we'll try to do a specific question for each candidate for a total of 5 minutes, and then we will also give another candidate chosen randomly to join in after 1 minute. So we will have a little bit of a lively discussion at the end. I don't think we will have a problem tonight, but if we get to a point where you're out of your time, you may want to just monitor my my picture here. I will show this sign. That means that you may want to wrap up if you could. The audience can put in questions in the chat area as well on Zoom. And this session will be in English, but if you would like to enter your questions in Farsi, go ahead and put it in the chat field, and we've got people who will translate and will convey the questions back to our candidates. شرکت کنندگان عزیز، در این جلسه پرسش‌های فارسی رو هم می‌توانید در چت بنویسید و اونا ترجمه میشن و سوال‌ها جواب داده خواهند شد. And then time permitting, we will for sure go through some of the questions from our audience at the end. Let's now start with the introductory question. In 2.5 minutes, please introduce yourselves and also include one election promise that you intend to keep, something that you're passionate about. We'll just take turns. Maybe we will start with Breen and then go to Hedy.
Thank you, Shervin. My name is Breen Willett, and I am the NDP candidate for Vancouver Centre once again. I was your candidate in 2019, and I made a promise then that I would run twice because I know that nobody has made that promise before and kept it. And so here I am. I keep my promises. I am a Métis man. That means that I'm an Indigenous person, originally from Saskatchewan, and I moved to Vancouver in 2014. And I came here because I left my career in IT to become a lawyer, and I started my articles here in Metro Vancouver. And later in my career, I became a lawyer for the National Inquiry into Missing and Murdered Indigenous Women and Girls. And it was inside that commission that we had the power to reach inside of government and to bring out information that is normally kept hidden. And even though I can't speak about a lot of that because it's sealed by order, what I saw troubled me. I saw a lot of oppressive government bureaucracy that is being committed in the names of Canadians like us, and it's very expensive and it needs to end. And so I believe that we need more leaders in Parliament who are going to speak to that. And I believe that as an Indigenous person, we need more Indigenous people in Parliament who are going to speak to these truths, who are going to seek justice for residential and for the mass graves of children who have been lost, and for current children who have been trapped inside of Canada's foster care system in a feedback loop, an industry that's fed on federal money moved into provincial coffers. That's an area that I'm very passionate about. And I'm also passionate about having a very healthy, safe, clean, successful community here in Vancouver Centre, and having an environment that we can all enjoy for generations, for our children and our grandchildren and their grandchildren. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Breen, for that. And thanks for being right on time as well. Hedy, would you like to address that as well?
Hello, I'm sorry, I was on mute. My name is Hedy Fry, and I have been a physician in Vancouver Centre ever since I first came here in 1970. I've delivered 800 babies. I know this part of Vancouver very well. And I was, again, the first woman to defeat a sitting prime minister, or the first rookie for that matter, when I ran against Kim Campbell. But I was convinced to run because of some things that bothered me as a practicing physician, watching my patients not have access to healthcare because of their LGBTQ status, or because of some of their the color of their skin and their race, etc. So I ran because of that. I wanted to change that. I convinced the then leader of our party, Jean Chrétien, that is something we should change. He agreed, and we did. And so I got hooked on politics because I was able to make a difference to a significant portion of my writing, the LGBTQ community. And as time went on, I found that there were so many things that I could influence from within Ottawa to make changes for the people who live in Vancouver Centre. For me, the biggest problem and the biggest issue is housing. I grew up in social housing as a little girl in Trinidad, and my parents never owned a home because they were having to choose between owning a home or sending me to university. Well, they decided to send me to university, and it was because of that education that I was able to become who I am today. And so I'm a strong believer in post-secondary education and the ability for people to seize opportunity. Those are some of the things that drive me, but housing is huge. Most of the people in Vancouver Centre are renters. Most of them would like to own a small, safe place to call home. And our party is promising that. We started back in 2015, and in 2017, we've put in since then $94 billion into a housing strategy. COVID came along and we were there for everybody. I recall my prime minister standing up day after day in the freezing cold in Ottawa, reassuring Canadians that we would be there for them when they lose their jobs. Businesses, we would be there to support them when they're closing. People who were never covered before, gig workers, contract workers, we were there for them. And we really, our job number one was to protect Canadians from getting COVID and to try and deal with an issue with the provinces. It meant that, that we still believe that that is our number one priority, to protect people in Canada from COVID-19 and to deal with whatever COVID-19 throws at us. That we will continue to be there for businesses, families, single persons, the tourism sector, the arts and cultural sector, to be able to help them to face whatever throws at them and to build back into a better place where we will not be thrown off guard by crises anymore. We will be able to weather them with some strong policies.
Thank you, Hedy. Actually, that's a great segue for us to the next question, which is about COVID-19 related to healthcare. And and again, because we have two candidates here, I'm going to ask it in two parts. So the first part is, we are in the middle of the fourth wave of the pandemic, which many, including Dr. Sorry about that. We are in the middle of the fourth wave of the pandemic, which many, including Dr. Bonnie Henry, have been referring to as the pandemic of the unvaccinated. Do you think Canada has done a good job in terms of vaccination rates? Do you support boosting vaccination rates? And if so, how would you do that? And do you support mandatory vaccinations for public-facing workers? And maybe, Hedy, I'll start with you, and then we can go to Breen.
Well, for starters, I think you're absolutely right. The fourth wave is the pandemic of the unvaccinated. We know that vaccinations have made a difference. And we know that if you are double vaccinated and you catch COVID-19, which you can still do, that actually it will be a very mild illness and it wouldn't take you to hospital and threaten your life. I think that's the first important thing. Do I support? I support vaccine records. We have always had vaccine records. You're traveling to a country and they want to know if you've had typhoid or if you've had the yellow fever vaccines, because it is a way to protect populations. Vaccines do that. I think we would like to see 92% of the population vaccinated, because that would give us what is known as herd immunity. But you cannot force someone to be vaccinated. But businesses and other groups may say, you cannot come into the place of work and harm the other people here because you're unvaccinated. And so this is what a vaccine record is doing, telling people, are you vaccinated or not? And are you safe to be around? I think the way to do it is by science, by helping people understand what vaccinations do and how this will help to protect you, your life, and the life of all the people around you, your loved ones, and your community. So that is something that we need to do. But I think that as a government, we have to continue to have a duty to protect, a duty to ensure that the greater good, and that many Canadians do not get very sick with this illness. And so one of the things we do is we're stopping foreign travel. We're letting people be vaccinated if they're going to come to the country. We're setting in place good regulations so that people can understand them and then make their decisions accordingly. But nobody is going to be forcing anybody to get vaccinated. We just want to know that your vaccine record says you are vaccinated, and therefore businesses, families, homes, individuals can make their own decisions about whether to hang out with you or to be with you or have you in their workplace.
Thank you, Hedy. And Breen, do you want to address that?
Yes, thank you. I think that we need to improve our vaccination rates. We definitely need to approach herd immunity as much as possible. I think it's also really important to recognize that there are large numbers of people in this province who, and across the country, who aren't vaccinated, namely children. And the Delta variant appears to be especially dangerous to them. So we need to make sure that children have opportunities to be vaccinated as well. One of the biggest disappointments I have with the pandemic response in Canada is the fact that the Canadian government decided to leave it up to the provinces to enact local policies at the provincial level. And we could have used the emergency powers of the federal government to have a national plan. We still could use the emergency powers of the federal government to have a national plan and a national response and national records. I support a national vaccine passport. I do support mandatory vaccination for health workers. And I support federal responses like segregating international travelers on airplanes from domestic travelers. This is a simple response that has not yet been undertaken by the federal government. When I had to travel to my father's funeral in Saskatchewan and to administer his estate earlier this year, I was on an airplane that was half full of international travelers and half full of domestic travelers. And it was clear that it was done to cut costs. And I find that to be absolutely unacceptable. The federal government can do better, and the New Democratic Party will do better.
Thanks, Breen. I will ask the second part of this question, and then I'm sure, Hedy, you can also respond to what Breen just said, if you wish. Or do you want to do that now, Hedy? I'll let you.
I would like to respond to what Breen said. I think it's very nice, and the NDP have been saying this all along about what they would do. There's a thing called a constitution in this country, and the delivery of healthcare, how it's delivered, where it's delivered, and to whom it is delivered has always been constitutionally the jurisdiction of the provinces. So as a federal government, we started to work with the provinces. 8 out of every $10 that was spent to protect and to support people during this pandemic was given by the federal government. We got protective equipment, we got vaccines. Canada is the most vaccinated per capita country in the world, in the G20 at the moment. We got all the vaccines 2 months ahead of time that we had set to vaccinate. We have already vaccinated. We're ready to give people a booster if they need. But to walk in and decide that because you're a federal government, you're going to roll up your sleeves and tell provinces what to do is not constitutionally appropriate. We managed to work with provinces very well. I mean, we found that provinces were easy to work with. They wanted to help their populations, and therefore we were able to get that done. But the idea that we can do and order and demand things when they're provincial jurisdiction is absolutely not the way to honor and respect the way that this country was built and the constitution of the nation. Thank you.
All right, thanks, Hedy. The second part of this question, and I'll go to Breen on this first, is people in other countries like Iran are in desperate needs of vaccines. Would you support a plan to prioritize and directly send extra vaccines for the use of people in these countries?
Thank you, Shervin. I'm just going to say one thing as a lawyer to the last point. The federal government does have the ability through peace, order, and good governance, a constitutional principle, to take over matters of provincial jurisdiction during times of emergency. And if a pandemic that has killed almost 30,000 Canadians does not constitute an emergency, then I really don't know what does. I think that Hedy is being disingenuous and potentially dishonest when she says that we shouldn't use those powers. As for extra vaccines, I think that anyone who understands the science of vaccinations knows that they will not be effective unless we have a global response. We need everyone in the world to be vaccinated so that we can get this disease under control. Otherwise, we are going to end up with a gamma variant that might be even more terrible than the Delta variant. It might start putting even more people in hospital, because while vaccines are better at protecting us, they're not 100% effective. And I personally know 3 people who have been double vaccinated who all spent time in the hospital with the Delta variant. Fortunately, it saved their lives, but they paid a terrible price to their health. So yes, we absolutely must do everything we can to get vaccines everywhere in the world, to get the whole world vaccinated. Thank you.
Thank you. Hedy?
I would not indulge in name calling personally, as was just done to me, but I'm not being disingenuous and I'm not being dishonest. We were working with the provinces and it was working. If it wasn't working with the provinces, of course we have that option to call the Emergency Measures Act. But you know what? It was better to work with the provinces and get everybody on side. So we were all pulling in the same direction. And that's what we did. I wanted to say that, yes, in fact, if we are not all vaccinated globally, we're never going to end this pandemic. And that's why Canada began, our government began at the very beginning. We were one of 2 countries that put quite a large sum of money into something called COVAX. It is a policy in which 92% of vaccines that we have and bought through COVAX would go to countries in the world that do not have the ability to get the vaccines themselves. That is still going on. And I think that this is something that we have led on and that we're moving already to some countries. I know my home country of Trinidad and Tobago has had vaccines sent to it by our federal government. So I think, again, the issue of sending vaccines to Iran is one that our government would be very, very interested in. It's going to have to be whether the government of Iran would like to cooperate with us on this.
Okay, thank you. Thank you both. I will go to the next question now, which is regarding the economy and the economic recovery. What will your party do to reboot the Canadian economy and create jobs? What are your plans for hard-hit areas, such as tourism and the airline industry? considering that the current government has already spent billions in the form of relief benefits and wage subsidies, how will you pay for any additional measures? And maybe we'll start with you, Hedy, since you've got the mic.
Well, I think for starters, it isn't how will we afford to or how could we. We cannot afford to let Canadians down. We have to protect them, and we will do whatever it takes to continue to protect them from COVID. We also believe that the way to keep economies open and to get jobs started and businesses as soon as possible was to have kept workers supported so they could pay their rent, put food on the table, and at the same time keep the link between the employer and the employee tight. And that's why we brought in wage subsidies for businesses, especially small and medium-sized businesses, but all businesses, to be able to pay to help keep their workers at home and keep that connection so that when they're ready to open, the workers are ready to jump back into the fray and go into work. But I think the other important thing is to look at how we do not go back to the way business used to be. We cannot ever. We saw all the holes created in the economy, in the social system, and in our healthcare system that COVID exposed. So we have to build back a different way. And I think one of the things we have to do with our economy that we're doing is for instance, we're going to have to concentrate on building back jobs. We have already recovered to 92% of the jobs that were lost during COVID. We're going to have to support workers in retraining, in new jobs, getting young people into jobs, because for 2 years, many of them couldn't work and didn't have any attachment to a career path. We're going to have to look at supporting Canadian businesses as we have been doing, and that we are already doing that, but looking on how we help the families and workers and sectors like the arts and culture and the tourism sector that are the backbone of some of the small and medium-sized businesses in the country. So we're going to have to help them push forward, but to push forward in a way that if we ever have another crisis, that everybody is going to be able to be resilient. They're going to be able to hold their heads up clearly above water and not be destroyed by the crisis again. And that's why we have to build back differently. We're also investing in innovation, science, and research, because we want to become a biomedical leader in the world right now. We are the ones who have discovered the vaccines and a lot of the treatments here at UBC, actually. We're investing now in creating a biomedical sector within this country that can get us prepared for another pandemic and also give our goods to the world and sell our goods to the world. Research on a green economy, because we're building back green. And so we are now giving assistance to industry to be innovative in clean fuel technology. As I said, keeping the arts and culture alive means that when the tourism industry comes back, arts and culture will be there. And of course, the very fact that the arts and culture tell us who we are, they are our soul, they keep us as a people together, and that's really important. And now to look at a fairer financial system, we've seen a lot of people beaten up in this COVID-19 by their banks and by their lenders, huge interest rates, and we are going to change that so that we can make sure. I mean, we worked with banks to help them to get money to keep them afloat, but we are also going to make sure that banks do not charge usurious loans and percentages of things, and that women, for instance, can get money at a bank instead of saying you're a woman and you don't have collateral. We're moving forward to work with banks to be able to ensure we can start businesses, get workers there, trained and ready to roll. And we want to be part of a competitive country that's going to be a leader in certain sectors.
Thank you, Hedy and Breen.
Thank you, Shervin. To create jobs, we need to have the industries that are capable of supporting those jobs. And right now, Canada is heavily a resource invested country. We aren't using people's brains to grow our economy. We're using what's in the ground. And there's a limited amount of time on how much longer we can use what's in the ground. And the more that we use it, the more we run down the clock and put the futures of our children and our grandchildren at risk. So the NDP, the New Democratic Party, wants to see a new Green Deal for Canada. We want to actually pursue green technology ventures throughout the country. And the way that we propose to do it is not by buying and developing pipelines to bail out foreign companies. It's to take the $20 billion every year in oil and gas subsidies and reallocate that to new green technology. We need training and retraining so that people in the oil and gas sectors can have a place to go from a dying industry. And we need to support our local endeavors to move us forward in that new green dream. So for instance, we've got Harbour Air here in Vancouver and BC, and they are working to convert their planes to electric. They could use help to convert more of their planes to electric. And we have a local company known as General Fusion that is working on the incredible future of unlimited electrical energy by harnessing the power of the sun. A minuscule amount of money worldwide gets put into that technology, and we could be leading the charge by taking some of that massive $20 billion a year and putting it into these companies. The federal government can also lead the way by converting the federal fleet to zero-emission vehicles over the next 5 years. That will create more industry to build up the infrastructure to support the federal fleet. And at the same time, that will allow Canadians to move to more zero-emission vehicles, which will support our automotive sector to build those vehicles. There is a way forward, and it's without oil. And that's how the New Democratic Party proposes to do it.
Thank you, Breen. And I just, I'm gonna take that as a bit of a segue. And there was a question in the chat that I saw, and I think this is a good time to ask it while we are on the economy. And the question in the chat was, I would like to know what the candidates' positions are on Trans Mountain. So if either of you would like to address that, that would be great. Breen, would you like to address that?
My position has remained the same since 2019 when I opposed the Trans Mountain Pipeline expansion. I have signed a pledge that as your MP, I will stop the Trans Mountain Pipeline, and I stand by that. It was a huge mistake of the federal government to take over the Trans Mountain Pipeline. By doing so, they helped assist the company that owned the pipeline to reorganize. And then a year later in the financials, that company was proudly proclaiming that the money that they got, including the billions of dollars from the Canadian government, was being used so that they could more aggressively pursue fracking in our country and in other countries. And fracking of natural gas is a terribly destructive process that causes earthquakes and pollutes the water. It never should have happened. I absolutely oppose the Trans Mountain Pipeline.
And Hedy, what is your opinion of the Trans Mountain?
My opinion of the Trans Mountain is this. There is a great deal of oil that had to move, that was already sitting there in Alberta, that had to get to market, and that we felt that we would support it to get there in the interim. Right now, I think Breen talks a lot about electric cars, etc. We've been doing this. I don't know where Breen has been, but for the last 5 years, we have been building stations across this country so you can take an electric car and drive from Victoria to Newfoundland. We're putting charging stations. We're giving people $5,000 rebate if they buy an electric car. We have been investing in fleets of electric buses across this country. We are no longer dependent on what is going under the ground. We are talking about the people who walk on it and what is there, the human resources that we have. That's what we're talking about. And I just wanted to say that every time you hear Breen and the NDP talk, this is the one thing they talk about. We just got an 8 out of 10 rating out of Professor Jacquard, who is one of the preeminent climate scientists in this world, and from the leader of the Green Party in British Columbia, Dr. Andrew Weaver, who gave us 8 out of 10. I think if I'm thinking right, they gave the NDP 2 out of 10 for their climate plan and their climate platform. So let's not pretend that you can say generic things and make it happen. We've been doing this now for the last 5 years, phasing out coal, phasing out a whole lot of things that we don't want to depend on anymore, and moving to technology. You can get a 50% tax rebate if you invest as a company in green energy and in clean energy. Right now, you can do that in the budget. The budget passed that. So there are a lot of things that we have been doing, and that's why we got an 8 out of 10 rating, and the NDP only got a 2 out of 10. So let's not make one thing the issue here. Let's talk about climate change from a real point of view to bring down greenhouse gas emissions and to set about doing it.
Regarding climate change, thanks, Hedy and Green. Regarding climate change, I actually have a question for you guys. The Liberal Party promises to cut Canada's greenhouse gas emissions, I believe, by 40 to 45% below the 2005 levels by the year 2030. And I believe, and you guys can correct me if I'm wrong, the NDP's position is 50% for the same period of time. The Conservatives are down in the 30% and the Green is 60%. Why does your party take the position it has taken, and how will it achieve these targets, as it appears that Canada has not been able to make sufficient progress on cutting the emissions so far? So maybe I'll get Breen to go first on this one, and then we'll go with Hedy.
Thank you, Shervin. For the record, as a lawyer, I always have to note that Hedy took the position of supporting Trans Mountain Pipeline. And I also want to note, too, that Hedy is relying on an economic expert for environmental policy, and that economic expert has not been peer-reviewed in any of the claims that he's made. He's brought out a so-called scientific report that has not reached peer review. So the numbers that Hedy has quoted are basically untested. And so everybody should take those numbers with quite a heavy grain of salt. I'd like to see some well-known scientists like David Suzuki weigh in on whether or not this economist has actually put a plan forward. So we know, as Hedy has said, the Liberals intend to keep moving oil through the Trans Mountain Pipeline expansion. And by doing that, we're going to keep burning carbon and putting it out in the atmosphere. And the Liberal Party is going to continue to fail at achieving the goals that it has been failing at so far. It's pretty simple. Take the $20 billion that is used to subsidize a very profitable industry and move it into a Green New Deal so we can get Canada on the track of the future, instead of continuing to push oil out for the rest of the world to burn. It just makes absolutely no sense. And she didn't address it. She didn't address it at all in her last question. And the reason is because it doesn't make any sense. Thanks.
Thank you, Hedy.
I would like to address the fact that I actually did not support the Trans Mountain Pipeline. I wrote a piece in the Georgia Strait saying so and saying why. So, you know, we can keep going on the one thing of the Trans Mountain Pipeline. I'd like to talk about what we are doing for climate and the idea that Green would, I mean, and the NDP do this. They just, anybody who doesn't agree with them gets trashed. And so Professor Jarkard, who is internationally renowned, and Professor Andrew Weaver, who are all internationally renowned, have been just thrown under the bus by this person who, because he doesn't give them a good rating, they don't agree with him. That's not the point. The point is we are looking at every aspect of climate change. We are looking at the fires that are going on in BC. We've been there supporting British Columbia through all its fires. We are now going to be creating more firefighters across this country so that we can be ready. We're buying Canadian planes and Canadian water bombers to be able to have them ready in case of another fire in the next summer. So we've already started not only helping, but preparing for the future. We have looking at keeping our oceans. We have put billions of dollars already in the last 4 years to keeping our oceans and the creatures that live in it, the orca and across the white whale over in the Atlantic, to keeping them safe. We are supporting and cleaning. We've gone ahead of the amount that we have predicted we would do in terms of keeping fresh water and keeping our lakes clean and fresh. We have created 17% of marine protected areas. And we have reached, actually, the European Union has decided that we have outdone them in reaching climate targets and in setting a credible plan, which has been vetted in terms of the costing by the Parliamentary Budget Officer. And it says we're right on target to be probably #1 in the G7 in terms of doing work on climate change, and #2 in the G20 in terms of doing work on climate change. So, I mean, I can just say that the figures stand for themselves. What we have been doing stand for themselves. It's not what we only say we're going to do, it's what we have already been doing.
Okay, thank you, both of you. I'm going to move to our question on foreign policy. And the question is, Canadians watched as the Taliban took over the country of Afghanistan, while approximately 2,700 people were flown out of Afghanistan on Canadian flights. Thousands of others remain in the country, as many interpreters and others who worked and helped Canada's mission never got out. Do you think Mr. Trudeau's handling of Canada's evacuation mission in Afghanistan was a success? What additional actions, if any, do you recommend the government take? Hedy, do you want to try that first?
Yes, I would like to try that. I think that one of the things is we have been quite successful in bringing as many people as we can out of Afghanistan. And we're focusing mostly on those who have had Canadian forces in Afghanistan with interpretation, etc. We have actually brought out more people in these last few months than the Conservatives did in 4 years when they said they were going to get people out of Afghanistan. Secondly, we are bound and determined we're going to resettle 20,000 Afghans. And we are working with surrounding nations to be able to get them through to those other nations so we can bring them through. The Taliban closed down the airports and it is very difficult to get people out. And so that's where we're working. We're now working with surrounding nations to be able to do that. We've made a commitment to Afghans. We intend to fulfill it. And I think we have already brought in more people to Canada, as I said, in the last few months than anyone has done in the last 4 years. So this is something we are bound and determined to do. Sometimes, as I know, I've heard Breen say that, you can do what you want. You can just railroad everybody and chomp in and do whatever you want and damn the rules. The point is that we know that we cannot get people out of Afghanistan safely. And so we are working with the people around to try and find a way to make this happen. And this is beginning to work. We are already finding like-minded and interested countries in helping us get Afghans out.
Yeah, Breen?
Thank you, Shervin. I'd just like to remind everybody that Dr. Fry was an MP at the time 20 years ago when Canada tromped into Afghanistan and damned the rules in the first place. Now, with the current situation, Mr. Trudeau called an election the day Kabul fell to the Taliban. And the Liberal Party promised that 20,000 Afghan refugees would be safe, but they failed to reach that goal by more than 16,000 people. So now it's been rephrased as we're going to do it now by moving people to other countries in a much more dangerous way. And on top of that, I'll give Dr. Fry credit. She did recognize that they limited the help to people who had helped Canadian forces and diplomats as interpreters. Now, people in our riding are telling me that the refugee process is far too time-consuming under these pressing circumstances, and that the Liberal Party have said nothing about the Afghan families here in Canada who are worried about their relatives in great danger back in Afghanistan. Liberal Foreign Minister Marc Garneau has refused to rule out working with the Taliban, and the Liberal Party abandoned your families and left without a proper transition. I have been saying since this election that human rights are universal, and we cannot in good conscience recognize the Taliban as a legitimate government. We must end the failures of Canada and its allies over the last 2 decades. We must support resistance in Afghanistan and advocate for human rights for everyone, including women and the free press. I am committed to that. And the last thing I'll say is, if you ask around in Vancouver Centre, other people are going to tell you that Dr. Fry is failing on this file. I suggest that people here tonight talk to Jenny Moss from Multi-Agency Partnership that helps refugee claimants. Jenny will tell you how Dr. Fry has not helped them. Thank you.
Thank you. Hedy, I don't know if you want to.
I want to rebut that, because I think it's really interesting. You know, I would like to admit that I am one person and I cannot do what Breen is promising to do. God bless him. If he thinks that single-handedly he can go in and bring people out of Afghanistan, that's great. I applaud him if he does that. I will be standing and cheering for him. But I am working closely within my government and with all of the people who have spoken to me in my office about this issue. We are doing what we can, and we promise that we will bring people out every day. I get information out of the 3 ministers involved, Mark Garneau and Mr. Sedran and Mendicino. When we have people with trouble, we waive the rules to get them into the country. What we did with Hong Kong, we didn't wait on process. We brought in Hong Kongers who wanted to come to Canada. We've done the same thing with people from Afghanistan. Afghans. We are moving forward. We brought in about 6 months, 25,000 Syrian refugees. I mean, we waive when people are in danger. Of course, human rights are universal. Who would agree that it isn't? So that's such a trite thing to say. Human rights are universal, and Canada will drop the rules and move forward to protect people who are in danger. And we have been doing all we can to get that. The problem is, and I think if Breen has a great plan to suddenly go into Afghanistan and tell the Taliban that if they don't do what he tells them, he will whatever, I don't know. But I mean, I'm working within my government and within the international community to try and make this happen.
I'll go ahead and ask the next question. This question is a question for you, Hedy, and then we'll let Breen to jump in after 1 minute, and we can have a conversation on this. And the question is, an election was called as the 4th wave of the pandemic was taking hold. Majority of Canadians did not want an election this fall. Do you agree with most Canadians on this issue?
We had to have this election when we did. We had gone through 2 full years of 3 waves of COVID-19. When we ran in 2019 as a government, we made promises that we were going to keep, and then suddenly this COVID-19 occurred. We have not been able to do the things that we now discover we need to do to deal with the waves of COVID-19. And so one of the things that we want is to get Canadians to work with us, to tell us how we can move forward, to get our social system, our health system, and all of those things ready and rolling to be able to deal with the pandemic. But here it is. Let us not forget that we are the most vaccinated country per capita in the G7 and the second most vaccinated in the G20. We are there, we are vaccinating our people. The vaccines are there, and they're there for boosters. If science tells us that boosters are going to work and are necessary, we have vaccines. We have vaccines to give Canadians 2 months ahead of schedule. We have been doing everything we can, but we really need a mandate from the people to move forward in a different direction, to be able to do some of the things we need to do, rebuild, to open schools safely, to do so many things that we need to do, because we need to help the vulnerable and we need to help our health systems.
Breen, you can jump in if you like. Thanks.
Thanks, Shervin. I absolutely do agree that with the majority of Canadians that this election was called opportunistically during the fourth wave, and it never should have happened. And the really interesting thing that I hear as I listen to Dr. Fry is that the Liberals are seeking a majority mandate to do a bunch of things that include infringing on provincial powers. So to me, it sounds like Hetty is actually saying that she wants to have a majority so the government can employ the emergency powers of the federal government without any pushback of a potential election call, without having to deal with the risks of being viewed as heavy-handed. This is the kind of Liberal Party baby stepping that I've talked about before. They are afraid to exercise those powers and then go into the Supreme Court of Canada and justify it. That is how it would work if we had a government that had the courage to do the right thing. And I'm telling you now that the new Democratic Party is your government with the courage to do the right thing.
May I please respond, because I was misinterpreted by Breen? I never used the word majority. I don't think we're seeking a majority government. We're just seeking a government. We're seeking government to do what we have to do. The idea that just because we're a majority government, we would jump on the provinces and break the constitutional law that governs our federation is ridiculous. We will never do that, because guess what? We have been bringing forward policies and we're getting provinces to agree, to sign agreements, to sign on with us to do the things we want to do. Right now, we have 8 provinces and 1 territory signed on to childcare and early learning, which is a provincial jurisdiction. And it's called the art of talking to people, negotiating with them, getting them on side, as opposed to running roughshod over everybody and saying that we would jump on people. I never said that, Breen. Don't put words into my mouth, please. I never said any of those things you accuse me of saying. And I would never condone going and running roughshod over provinces the way the NDP seem to think that they can do.
Yeah, well, I'm not convinced. I don't know if anybody else is here, but I'm certainly not.
Okay, I think this is a good time. We've perhaps spent enough time on that question. Let's go to a question I have for you, Breen, and then Hedy, you can join in after giving Breen a chance to answer it. So your question, Breen, is in an interview, you said that Canadian doctors, social workers, police officers, and others should be tried for genocide in the International Criminal Court. You said that you intend to introduce a private member's bill for this purpose. And the question is, does your party actually support your initiative, or is this your personal initiative? And maybe you can discuss that a little bit.
Well, my party has not taken an adverse position on that initiative, and I do have other now candidates, formerly NDP members of Parliament, who support me in that initiative. And the reason that it's necessary is because Canada did sign on to the Rome Statute of the International Criminal Court. Canada did accept the jurisdiction of that court here in Canada, and Canada did enact legislation domestically to mirror the International Criminal Court. Because one of the things that the International Criminal Court looks at when a country is committing genocide is whether or not it will prosecute the perpetrators in its own legal system. And so Canada had to create that legislation. But one of the problems with that legislation is that it requires the personal consent of the sitting Attorney General before an investigation and prosecution may occur. And because many of these issues that we are looking at involving genocide bleed over into the cabinet of the government, from Jean Chrétien to Paul Martin to Stephen Harper and now to Justin Trudeau. Actions and inactions on genocide and apartheid directly implicate the sitting Attorney General. And so there's a lack of will for the Canadian government to bring those investigations. And so when we've seen, as recently as 2018, doctors are sterilizing Indigenous women, the federal government says that the existing law is fine, we don't need to investigate it as genocide. But then when you check, none of those doctors have been pursued in the criminal courts. None of those doctors have even been reviewed by their professional regulatory bodies. So yes, we do need the International Criminal Court to investigate these crimes.
Okay, thank you. And Hedy, do you want to jump in here?
No, I really don't, because I think once again, I will allow Breen to say what he as a person is going to do without any support from his party whatsoever officially. So I can't respond to it.
Okay, and Breen, I just have something in the chat as well that somebody is bringing up. You may have seen it. The Supreme Court's role in this, and maybe you can just comment on that before we move on.
I haven't seen the comment. So the comment is simply, what is the Supreme Court's role?
Says that your suggestion that the Liberals are attempting to use the Supreme Court to use provincial powers is appallingly whatever. It suggests that the Supreme Court as a partisan body, this is not the US, and so on.
Oh, I see, I get it. So I think that the person in the chat has misunderstood what I'm saying. The way that the justice system works in Canada is not that the Supreme Court of Canada jumps into a case. The way that it works is that a police body, such as the RCMP, has to investigate a crime and bring charges and refer them to a prosecutor, a crown prosecutor, a government lawyer, and then that government lawyer will decide whether or not to bring a case into the BC Supreme Court, will say, if we're in BC, and then that crime will be adjudicated, it'll be heard by that level of court. And then if the person is found guilty, they have a right to appeal to the appellate court of BC. And then finally, if they're found guilty again, they have a right to appeal to the Supreme Court of Canada. So that's the process. But the very first step is that a police body like the RCMP has to be allowed to investigate the crime, and the Crown Prosecutor's Office has to be allowed to prosecute the crime. And the Attorney General of Canada, who was Mr. Lametti, is part of the federal government cabinet. He's a minister, and it requires his personal consent to allow that investigation to start before it can even get into court. So if you felt that the courts are being slandered by me, that is definitely not the case. The courts don't have any control over that part of the process. It's the very first part that the federal government, the cabinet, has the ability to say, no, we're just not going to investigate it. And that's why we need the International Court to come in, because they can circumvent the cabinet. That Rome Statute of the International Criminal Court allows them to investigate crimes that the Liberal Party of Canada is reluctant to investigate.
Okay, thank you. And I just want to ask one more question addressed to both of you, and then we want to do I guess a photo. So people are telling me we should do a photo for this event. But before we go to the photo session, I'd like to ask, what is your position on taking control on the housing crisis and the affordability for specifically for housing. And there were some questions in the chat as well. So maybe Hedy, you can start with, I will start with you on this.
Well, this is the number one issue in Vancouver Centre, the issue of housing. I would say almost 90% of the people who live in the West End, for example, are renters. And the thing about renting is that your landlord can up your rent by just painting the inside of the apartment. And a lot of people have been faced with what are known as renovictions. The landlord says they renovated, they did some small thing, and suddenly the rent is jacked up and people can't afford to pay it, and so they leave. That's something that we have clearly said in our selling, that a lot of us who live in ridings like Vancouver Centre and in Toronto Centre brought to our government and said, you've got to do something about it. So we are going to deal with renovictions as an illegal issue, and we're going to stop it. The other thing is, the ability to own a home is a human right. We are the government that passed such legislation between 2015 and 2019 that said that housing is a human right. So housing is a big issue for us. One of the things that we are planning to do is looking at what's worked in other parts of the world. One of the things we're planning to do, for instance, is Canadian Mortgage and Housing Corporation is going to be building new housing, working with co-op and working with private sector and NGO groups to be able to build housing, and people can move in, and for 5 years they can pay rent. At the end of that 5 years, they can own that apartment or that condo or whatever it is they're living in, and their rental becomes mortgage payments. And so this is something that we can control because CMHC, as the mortgagor, will be able to bring in that kind of rule to help people to do that. That's one of the important things. Flipping houses in Vancouver. I came here in 1970. I bought a house for a sum of money I would never believe anybody could buy a car for today. And I was able to live in that house, etc. But what we saw was that people flipped houses. We're going to be against that. Flipping in under a year and is absolutely a no-no. We're going to be bringing in a lot of regulations with regard to mortgages and banks that are going to be able to help people to be able to see if they can find a place to live that is safe and secure. At the same time, we know that we also have to build social housing. And during the pandemic, I worked very closely with the mayor of Vancouver so that we had a whole number of people who are homeless or couch surfing sometimes, going from place to place because you don't have anywhere to live. And we created what's known as that rapid housing initiative. And out of that initiative, we have taken some of the old hotels here and renovated them and moved people into them so they can have a place to live that is safe and secure. And so these are some of the things we've actually been working on already, and that we are ready to move forward to seeing housing and making sure housing is deemed a human right in this country. And I know because, as I said, my father never owned a house because he couldn't afford to, and I lived in social housing. So I understand the need for housing.
Okay. Breen, I'm sure you want to jump in here.
Yes, thank you, Shervin. I'm not sure that Dr. Fry understands what a human right is. Home ownership as a human right is a very bizarre concept because I'm not aware of the government trying to prevent people from owning homes. And that's what human rights are meant to do in Canada. They're meant to prevent infringement by the government and by private individuals. So I'm very confused by what Dr. Fry just said. I also note that Dr. Fry has talked a lot about infringing on the provincial jurisdiction again. Perhaps she means that she wants to work with the provinces as a negotiating partner, and I definitely agree with that. I think that the plan to purchase hotels and to use them to house people after renovating them has been shown to be a flawed plan, because the people that are being moved into these places, many of them have very serious drug addiction disorder issues and mental health issues, and they don't have the services they need where they live. So we need a federal government. We need a new democratic government that understands that to keep our streets safe and clean and supportive, we need to build the housing with the supports that help those people to thrive so that we have safer, cleaner communities. And we can do that through many, many different means, including through safe supply of drugs universally. And we can do that through decriminalization of possession across the board. We've seen other countries do it, and they've had remarkable successes, like Portugal. Portugal turned around their opioid crisis, and now they have the lowest rates of drug addiction and even alcohol and tobacco addiction in Europe. So we can do that. Another thing that we can do to take control of the housing crisis is we can crack down on the money laundering that happens through property purchasing. And if we're going to actually do that, we need to provide the Canada Revenue Agency and the RCMP with the tools to enforce it. So the NDP is going to ensure that new money goes into enforcement bodies so that we can crack down on these people that are causing our property values to go up and price so many of us out of the market. Thank you.
Thank you. And go ahead, Hedy, go ahead.
Sorry, Green interprets what I say from his own perspective. I never said that owning a home is a human right.
I'm sure if we play back the recording, it'll say exactly that.
Finish, please. I never said we passed. We passed that legislation, Green. If you were paying attention, you might have known that. It's like housing, not home ownership. Housing, the ability to have a safe, four walls around you and a roof over your head, that a safe place. That's what we said is a human right. And in fact, internationally, the United Nations says housing is a human right. So, you know, we are talking about housing and not home ownership, Green. And I think one of the things that you don't understand is that we now have a national housing strategy because we have signed agreements with provinces, municipalities, non-profit sectors, and private developers to be able to build all of the spectrum of housing, from housing for the homeless, social housing, you know, owning a home, co-op housing, etc. So we are working with the provinces, of course we are. So any way it can be done.
Thank you, both of you. I think there are some lots of questions coming in the chat, and I'm going to ask Mr. Vafadust or Amir or Mohsen to help me out with those. But before we do that, why don't we do the photo now, and we just take a little break, and we'll come back to the chat questions afterwards. So whoever is going to take the photo, we are ready for you.
All right. Thank you, everyone, for staying with us so long. And this is a record-breaking tech talk. For those of you who want to be in the photo, please turn your cameras on and smile. And I have to take multiple photos because it does not fit on in my frame, so please bear with me. So I'll do the first one. I have to do 3 times. I don't know which frame are you, so be prepared for all of them. 1, 2, and 3. Sorry, one more time. 1, 2, and 3. Going to the second page. All right. 1, 2, and 3. All right, last but not least, 1, 2, and 3. Passing it back to Sharon.
Thank you, Amir. Amir, actually, while you're on, do you have any of those questions or Mohsen to ask from the chat? Because I haven't had a chance to go through them yet.
Mohsen will help.
Yeah, sure. Can you hear me?
Yes, go ahead.
So the first question is, liberals were in power for 6 years. I was wondering why they didn't do much about housing crisis and how we believe that this time they will.
Obviously, that question is addressed to me. Yes, in 2015, we actually started the national housing strategy with the provinces and the partners that I talked about earlier on. So we have been doing things before housing. We put in about is it $94 billion up until now into looking at the full spectrum of housing, from homelessness to social housing to affordable rental housing to the ability to live in co-op and in other things. So we have been working on this for the longest time. And so we have just, and in fact, as I said, during COVID, we had to shift into looking at some emergency housing for a lot of people. And we were doing that. But again, we were working with them directly, in some instances, with the municipalities to make that happen. So we have had a strong housing strategy and been working on it, building housing for people.
Thank you. Mohsen, is there any other question that we haven't
Sure.
covered? Yes.
I'm sorry. I know this question was directed to Dr. Fry, and she's mentioned the $94 billion a few times. I'd like to know over what period of time we're talking about this $94 billion. Is this since you've been in the seat since 1993? And what do we have to show for the $94 billion over the time that it's been spent? Has the cost of housing come down?
No, I think the gentleman had asked a question about the 6 years. So I'm speaking about 2015, when this particular government became government. So I'm speaking within that time frame.
$94 billion. And what have you seen to show that the $94 billion has had an effect?
Well, we have built a large number, and I could go over them, and in fact, I could get them and give them to you, but we've built a large number of social housing units. We've built a large number of hotels that have been renovated for those who are homeless to live in. We have actually, it was interesting, you talked about a very interesting idea, which is one that is true, is that when we build up places to house social housing for people who are substance users and who have mental illnesses, that they need to have a place to take care of them. I just actually announced such a housing construction, which just began in the downtown east side. We have well over 200 units of housing and 25,000 square foot of a clinic for persons with mental illness and substance use disorders to be able to be there. And they're going to be living upstairs. So this is something we've been working very closely with the mayor and with the people in downtown east side to be able to get. And we managed to cut the ribbon on it a while ago. So that's one example. And you're absolutely right. And I am in agreement with you about the issue that when you build, you have to build clinics and places to help people with mental illness and substance use disorders to be able to attend. And that's just something we're moving into doing now. But again, you know, as I said before, we've got to work with provinces that are willing and with municipalities that are willing. And we're very fortunate that the current government in British Columbia is willing to work with us. And the mayor of Vancouver is very willing to work with us and keen on some of these initiatives. So it's been an easy sailing to get those things done.
Thank you both. Are there any more questions from the chat?
There are a few more questions. Another question related to the housing crisis. I'll ask this question, then go for the rest of them. The other question is, the NDP's housing plan is predicted on giving taxpayers money to people to pay rent. This will do nothing in regard to addressing the soaring cost of rents and house prices. Indeed, it will only feed into this corrupt market. What of substance is the NDP proposing to do? Because it appears that they are just going to continue rewarding exploitative practices. So this time I think it's for Breen.
Yeah, yes, thank you for that question. So, I mean, we did talk about it earlier that we need to have a federal government that invests in enforcement of practices like money laundering in property investment that cause the cost of housing to go up. We also need to invest in enforcement of foreign buyers of homes. And we need to prevent people from using Vancouver and Canada as a place to move their money so that they can get it out of the hands of a potentially capitalist, unfriendly regime like China. My wife is from China, and she knows that the sudden growth of wealth in China has caused a lot of wealthy people to look for places to move their money so that it's out of the potential grasp of the Chinese government. And homes in Vancouver are very popular. So that's why the new Democratic Party proposes that foreign buyers should be taxed 20% to prevent them from choosing Vancouver as the spot where they're going to purchase property and then let it sit empty and cause our cost of living as the people that live here to skyrocket.
Sorry, could I clarify? That was my question, and I don't think it was quite answered. I wonder if I can offer a clarification. So one of the big elements that Jagmeet Singh has announced in terms of the housing plan is $5,000 subsidies for rent. But the problem with that is that it does absolutely nothing to crack down on the corrupt market that we have that's pricing rent and pricing homes out of people's reach. And I don't understand why any political party that wants to be taken seriously by people is proposing handing over taxpayer money instead of addressing the market problem that we actually have. And respectfully, Mr. Ouellette, that's precisely what your party's proposing doing. And I just don't understand how that is a viable solution.
It's part of an overall plan. So that is the point. It's part of an overall plan. We need ways for people who are on the verge of crisis now. Many people in the downtown in Vancouver Center who are having to move out because the risk that they get rent evicted is so high that they could become marginalized and on the street. So they are proactively moving farther and farther away. And then this has a really huge impact on all areas of our life, as I'm sure you're aware of, even things like our ability to retain professionals in the tech sector, because they're afraid that they could get priced out of the market and it's safer for them to move down to the United States.
Could I please join in a little bit into this? Because I agree with you that giving people money to subsidize rent, I mean, we've been doing it because of the COVID pandemic, because, you know, people needed to pay rent when they lost their jobs. But I agree with you. And I think one of the things that we have been talking about is not just rent evictions. We said we will prevent them from happening. And we will introduce an anti-flipping tax for properties. But what we are also going to be doing is introducing a homeowner's bill of rights, a home buyer's bill of rights, because one of the jacks up the prices of housing is when you have the real estate agent who is bidding quietly and you're not knowing and you're suddenly having all this bidding going on, and this becomes a bidding war that jacks up the price. I agree with you that in fact foreign ownership from some places is a way of money laundering. And we have been working now for the last 3 years with the Attorney General here in British Columbia to do some things about this, because British Columbia is a prime place for the kind of house flipping to happen. And we've been working quite well with him to sort of deal with some of the things we need to do, including giving tools to Revenue Canada and giving tools to the Minister of Finance to be able to work with the Attorney General to get these things done. But it doesn't happen in a day. And so we've already started on some of that, and we're still working on some of that happening. But I do think that one of the things that we're looking at clearly is to bring in we have a national co-housing investment fund in which we have people who want to build affordable housing, whether they're NGOs, churches, whatever, or they're private sector, working with the provincial, federal, and the municipal government to build it. We're bringing in what is known as an accelerator fund so that we can move that up much more quickly. And so we're putting an extra $4.7 billion into that fund alone, just to be able to move up getting that kind of housing start and getting affordable rental housing for people to live in that they will not be evicted from. So there, the thing about housing is that it's such a complex issue, and that one has to deal with all of the elements that's created the problem that we have here in British Columbia with regard to housing. And so I think, there is no simple answer, but working closely with partners like provinces, municipalities, co-op housing, churches are trying to build housing, say for seniors. And in fact, those are some of the things that we're working on with them, because together we can make it happen. There's no one level of government or no one group that will ever make it happen. We've got to come together and decide that we're going to deal with a full spectrum of housing for people. And I think that's really important. And one of the things we're going to make is a transparency in that process of bidding, that quiet, hidden process of bidding, where suddenly you came in and you thought you were bidding on a house for $700,000. Although I don't know who bids on a house for $700 in Vancouver. Nobody will get a house for $700,000. But you're bidding and you think you're fine and you've got a good time. The next thing is the houses you moved up to $1 million too. And you don't know when that happened and how that happened. And so that transparency in that process is very key to getting to the bottom of the problem.
Okay, I think we maybe move on to the next question, Mohsen, please.
Sure.
Next topic. Thank you.
Sure, I was planning to ask 2 more housing questions then.
If they are different from what we discussed, sure.
Yeah, I have a few.
Why just you talking about the housing? There is no other issue except housing. You know how housing does have on the environment? Everybody is moving to any place, make any houses, any places, and then make fire in the middle of summer that 230 still is going on, and none of the government doing anything about that. Every year we have the same issue. Every year we have the same issue. We bought $65 billion warship, not a few firefighting plane. For what? Why? Why not? We don't need our trees. We don't want our people breathe. Who is taking care of those issues? You just swimming on the shallow water. Why don't you go deeper on the down? The present issue is Afghanistan. What you did on Afghanistan? You brought the Taliban to the power. You brought them. You have seen the 7 nation industrial nation meeting, what they have done. Yeah, please.
Darshan, there's a queue here and we're asking questions based on
because
that.
You are just stuck in the housing.
Yeah, because that's
with the housing. Go for what? Because you're talking about all the companies that working on the housing, millions of contractors that are making money out of that.
Because it's people's concern.
That's your interest. That's your interest. The number of homeless people are increasing every day. So what happened? If you're making housing for the poor people, what happened to them? Nothing. You're just working for the well-established companies. That's all. The contractors. That's all. Nothing.
Okay, thank you. We were asking questions that people ask. It's not from us. So the next question is, I think for Dr. Fry, how does she explain her own neighboring candidate, Talib, flipping housing as his form of income? And we had this question 2 times.
I cannot explain it because I am not Mr. Nur Mohammed. You're going to have to ask him that question. But as I told you before, one of the things we are going to be doing is we are going to stop that ability to flip a house that you own under a year. And this is one of the things we're going to do. When that becomes law, I know that MPs will have to obey the law. And so I'm sure Mr. Nur Mohammed will be able to acquiesce to that law when the time comes. But I can't answer that question for you.
Okay, thank you. In addition to the 20% tax on foreign buyers, is there any further tax on property flipping, who flip more than 3 properties within a year?
Yes, it's going to be a tax. It's going to be called an anti-flipping tax.
Okay. So, okay. The next question is, what's your plan on providing permanent resident status for all migrants and refugees here, and landed status for folks who are to come?
Sorry,
It's not a complete question.
I didn't understand the question. Perhaps you could repeat it, please.
I think the problem is with the question.
Okay.
So let's move to the next question. Okay, what do you think about what federal government did about immigration process during the COVID time? Do you know many entrepreneurs like me are stuck in Canada for more than 18 months without any feedback from the government regarding their immigration to Canada? I believe that bureaucracy is the main friction against innovation in Canada. The process takes less than a few days in European countries.
That is not true during the COVID pandemic for any country. All countries were making emergency measures to try and protect their people and to try and protect the spread of the COVID virus. And so these are unusual times. This is not the normal time to talk about those things. It was unusual and countries took unusual measures. So I do not accept, because I work very closely with a lot of European nations on the OSCE, and I will tell you now that they were all changing what they were normally doing during normal times, during an emergency time. Emergency measures were taken. And so,
Breen,
sorry.
Sorry,
permanent residents.
I was just gonna ask Breen if he wants to also address any of these issues.
Yes, I know that people have had difficulties with permanent residents and immigration applications and refugee applications during COVID. And Dr. Fry is correct. It is a special, circumstance that we are in the middle of once in a century pandemic. So what we need from the federal government is once in a century flexibility, because I know people who've had their permanent resident status interrupted because of inflexibility of the federal government. And as a result, they've had to hire lawyers and put out a lot of expense to get themselves reestablished in Canada. And I think the federal government has done a very poor job of that. We need leadership that recognizes when flexibility is necessary and works to ensure that it is in place. And as someone who has a lot of friends and family who've been through the immigration process, including my own wife, I know what your concerns are, and I know how we can address them. Thank you.
I just wanted to give you an example of how governments can respond in an emergency. When the flight PS752 and Canadian Iranians were killed in that flight, we moved immediately to make a special effort for the families of those Iranians to be able to fast forward citizenship and to fast forward permanent residency, because we felt that this was important. So sometimes in trying times, governments will do something that is necessary to make sure that you help people who are having problems. And so we worked to do that with Iranians. We also work to do it with the people from Hong Kong. We have been working with other refugees who are in a great deal of trouble right now because of other crises, because it's not just the pandemic. There are conflicts going on around the world. Climate change is forcing people. There are 80 million people on the move globally right now without a place to call home. And this is something this is a global issue. And globally, we all have to, and our government has taken a leadership on this at the United Nations to talk about how internationally we look at the issue of refugees and immigrants, well, as Europe calls them, migrants, to be able to settle and to have a state that they can belong to so that they are no longer stateless persons. This is a great sadness, and I think it's time that all of us, multilateralism should take a hold, and multinationalism will help us to be able, with like-minded nations, to move this issue forward, because it's a real tragedy. We have generations of children who will never know what it is to live in a home, to have food on the table, and to be able to go to school.
Thanks, Hedy. I think in the interest of time, unless Breen wants to join in, I'd like to go to, sorry, Breen?
I will say one thing. Dr. Fry tends to cover a large field and stray beyond the question, but she mentioned Ukrainian flight PS-752. And I know from speaking with people in our local community who were affected by that tragedy, that one of the ways that we need to improve the government is we need to recognize that people here in the community have said that the Liberal Party government did many interviews with mainstream media and were always responsive to the mainstream media. But I'm told that they were not responsive to the local Iranian community and media. And so we need a government that is responsive to very legitimate questions and concerns of the people who are directly affected by these crises. You are not second-class citizens. And the new Democratic Party is a party of the people. It's a party of the grassroots. And we will be responsive to your future, as I have been during this election.
Okay,
I would like to suggest that I met on May the 23rd of this year with many members from the Iranian community, not just in my riding, and that I tabled their petition in the House of Commons, which had about almost 1,900 signatures in it. And it was asking the government of Canada to investigate the shooting down of the Ukrainian passenger flight 752, whose passengers were mostly citizens and residents of Canada, and to take it to the UN Security Council and get support from friendly countries to request support for an independent investigation. And we have done that. The government went to the United Nations and put forward a resolution to do exactly this. So the idea that nobody pays attention to this, I guess, is not true, and I would like to correct the facts.
Let's go to the next question, Mohsen. Do we have another question?
Yeah, we have a lot. So the next question is, it's a clarification about the previous question, which was unclear. The question is about those migrants and refugees whose labor this country relied on. Will you provide permanent residency or not?
We have already fast forwarded that for persons who come here and work under various visas. And we have fast forwarded this because we know that what we need are people we need workers in this country right now. And I think what we're doing is we've been fast forwarding some of that in terms of temporary foreign workers, in terms of migrants and refugees who come into the country and work on visas. We've now said that they could get permanent residency and move to citizenship as a fast forward basis. They're on a special list to fast forward them. And especially, I just wanted to add that I want to speak on behalf of, just on my behalf, to thank a lot of refugees and immigrants who came to this country who were not citizens, but who just stepped up during COVID, and they had training and they went on and they became frontline workers, whether it was in the health sector or in other sectors. And thank you to them for that. And it was because of that that we are fast forwarding their ability to become citizens in this country.
Breen, do you have any on that, or shall we go to the next question?
I'll quickly add that, as I've said previously, we need to take a humanitarian approach to people who are immigrating to Canada under difficult circumstances. We need to support them. We need to find better ways to make the applications as quick and unbureaucratic as possible. And we need to stop punishing people inadvertently through bureaucratic nightmares when they are victims of dangerous regimes and they're trying to escape for their lives. We need to make it as easy as possible for these people to come to the safety of our country and to be protected. And then on top of that, we have to work in our country to better recognize the foreign credentials of doctors and engineers and other professionals who have incredible skills, and their potential is wasted because they can't get the certification that they need in Canada without going and starting over again, as if they're a student. I've had so many of our neighbors from the Iranian and the Afghan community tell me that their family, their friends, and themselves can't get recognized as the professionals that we need in this country today.
Thank you. Mohsen?
Yeah, sure. So the next question is, there are a number of cases that immigrants and people on temporary residence from different nationalities, such as Iran, face unfair long waiting time to receive their PR status in Canada. This happened in 2018, where Iranians had to wait years to get their PR, while others would have gotten their status in 2 to 3 months. What did you do to help in these situations of unfair procedures, and what is your plan in the future to support these underrepresented communities?
I can speak for instance, for Iranians. On May the 2020, we opened up a new pathway to permanent residence. And that is from people who, and families, not just for families in Canada, but families of that shooting down, the people from the plane crash, the 752. And so that is something that we did. And we have been on record as looking at Hong Kong, and we waived all kinds of restrictions to get people from Hong Kong to come here ASAP because their lives were in danger. We did the same thing with Syrians. And we have been doing it with countries where this is a big issue. People are in danger of their lives. They need to get out as quickly as they can. And we have been waiving protocols in order to do that. But, this is something that happens when people come to you and they tell you that they're in trouble and that their lives are at stake. Then we have to still make sure that that is true, and that we're bringing in people whose lives are really at stake, and not bringing people who are the people that are, in fact, the cause of the conflict to others. So that is a check that still needs to be done. But we have waived some of these things just for certain groups that have been in conflict right now and are being, and their human rights are being violated.
Thank you, Breen.
Yes, and the one thing I will add to that is when I speak to people in the Iranian community, they tell me that they get treated poorly through the immigration process at times because of the interplay between Canadian politics and US politics. And that has a negative impact on Iranians who are trying to seek work and safety in Canada. And we need a country, we need a federal government that is going to stand up for the rights of honest people and protect them and make sure that they are safe here and able to thrive. And the New Democratic Party will do that for you.
Thank you. And next question, Mohsen.
The next question is, I know there were childcare agreements signed in 2005 under the Martin government. Wondering if Dr. Fry could tell us what happened to those and why we need to have a new agreements signed.
What kind of agreements?
Child care.
Oh, childcare agreements. Oh, yes. Not only were they signed, but there was money put forward to have it done. It was called the Quad Principles: quality, universal, accessible, and a national program for childcare. We signed it with every single province. But when Martin's government lost, the Conservative government of the day cancelled it, as it also cancelled the Kelowna Accord, which the Martin government had signed for Indigenous peoples of all kinds to have, of all parts of Canada, to have their own ability to create their own education, health, and housing system. That was signed. It was called the Kelowna Accord. That was also cancelled. There were many things that were cancelled when the Harper government came into power that had been signed by the Martin government. And all I can say is we would have been down the road. It was 2004. We would have been down the road 17 years with some of these things being programs. And we have to start all over again. And that's a pity. And we also know that the Conservatives have decided that they would cancel this agreement we have with 8 provinces and 1 territory. So I don't know what to say. I mean, childcare is a major issue. If we're going to get everybody who wants to work to be able to work, but they have children, I mean, we're talking about women mostly, but some men are looking after their children at home. They need to be able to have not only childcare so that they can go out and work if they wish to, but we're also talking about just the child. I mean, it is now known, and we found that out in the early 80s, that in fact a child absorbs 1/3 of its capacity for learning by the age of 6. Now, if we can make sure that it's not just childcare, but it's early childhood development, which is what was part of that that Martin agreement, and is now part of the agreement we're sending, is that we can give our children that head start, that early start. In those first 6 years, they can be able to become really competitive, get all their brains filled in the first 6 years, and move on to have a head start on other children around the world. I mean, that's what we're looking for as well in that childcare agreement, not just looking after the children, but early childhood education is a core part of it.
Thank you, Hedy. And Breen, do you want to address anything on childcare from your platform?
Yes, thank you, Shervin. So when Dr. Fry talks about the Conservatives canceling agreements, that is definitely a common concern that we share in the New Democratic Party. And childcare is especially important to the New Democratic Party because we believe that women should have every opportunity to succeed in our society. And so while Dr. Fry is talking about agreements that have already been signed and no new promises have been made by the federal Liberal Party, the New Democratic Party wants to have more seats in British Columbia for childcare spots. We want to ensure that we work with the province as closely as possible so that we can have a very successful future together. And so one of the questions that everyone here should be asking themselves, whichever party is in power, do you want to have a promise that's already been made, or would you like to have a promise that's new going forward?
Well, I would think a promise that has been made and already signed in the last few months with 8 provinces and 1 territory is an agreement that is signed. It's not a promise, it's something that's going to happen. And it's already starting to happen here in British Columbia. British Columbia was one of the first governments to sign that agreement with the federal government. So, you know,
we're not in disagreement. We're not in disagreement, Dr. Fry.
Really
what you've basically said, yes, you've confirmed it.
An agreement is an agreement. But I find something that's interesting, that your leader said that he could support a minority Conservative government. Will he be supporting them when they cancel the childcare agreement? Will he be supporting them when they roll back Canada Health Act and allow for private sector people to jump the queue? Will they support him when he repeals the gun control legislation that he has. So, you know, you have to have common ground if you're going to support another government, right? I don't, can you tell me what common ground you have with a
Well,
conservative?
it sounds to me, Dr. Fry, like you were saying that you have more common ground with the Conservatives than the New Democratic Party does. So I would definitely caution everyone to consider those words. It definitely is true in my belief that the Liberal Party of Canada has more in common with the Conservative government, the Conservative Party of Canada, than the New Democratic Party. And I think everybody here understands that.
I don't think everyone understands it at all, because we are totally opposed to what the Conservative Party wants to do in every one of those areas. It is your leader who said he could support a minority Conservative government, so I was just asking you. But you know, that's a segue. I don't want to go into that. I just asked you to explain what you could find common ground. And again, you interpret what I say, and I never said that we had anything in common with the Conservative government at all.
Well, I think you have the Trans Mountain Pipeline in common with the Conservative government. I think you have a lot of things that are in common with the Conservative government.
One thing you are talking about does not make many things, Breen. So let's not play fast and loose with the facts and the truth here, because I don't like to do that. My whole life has existed as a physician on facts and evidence and data. And I don't like people falsifying it and fudging it and kind of interpreting what I am saying when everyone here is hearing what I am saying. I never said any of those things that you put into my mouth, Breen. Let's not play that game. Let's just do this in a nice, open, friendly manner and not play games.
All right, so let's we're at the end, and what I'd like to do is maybe get Mohsen, if you can pick a question, last question. We'll give each candidate 1 minute, and then maybe I'll ask each candidate. I think this is a tradition in Tech Talk series that we ask all the presenters to come up with a key takeaway, 1 or 2 key takeaways from your point of view, and then we'll end it there. So Mohsen, is there maybe one final question?
Yeah, sure.
A good one, hopefully, that you can have.
So the question is, there is a fixed date election law in Canada, and Liberals chose to ignore it. That will cost us over $500 million to administer the election in the middle of a pandemic. Why are they seeking government if they are already the government?
I think I answered that earlier on, but I will answer it again. I think during COVID-19, I have to tell you that I was on Zoom with sometimes 30, 40 people in various sectors in my riding, trying to find out if some of the things we said that we were planning to do to help them through the COVID pandemic was stuff that would work. And I heard back from some of them that that may sound like a good idea, but it's got these problems to it, etc. And we fed that right back up to the people that were making the decisions. And we changed our minds having listened to people. I think our government likes to make sure that we're hearing what Canadians have to say. We will hear what Canadians have to say on September the 20th. And that's what we're doing right now, to give us the ability to move forward, to recreate new social, health, and economic infrastructures in this country.
And Breen, maybe one final remark from you on the election, calling the election.
Yes. Well, I think that if the Liberal Party of Canada was listening to Canadians, then they wouldn't have called the election, because it was very clear that Canadians were not interested in having it.
All right, so we'll again, we are at the end. I just want to thank both of you for the last 2 hours and all the participants. But I'd like to ask both Hedy and Breen for 1 or 2 key takeaways from your point of view for this session that we had tonight. Maybe Breen, we will start with you. I've got you on my screen here, so go ahead.
Thank you, Shervin. One of the key things that I've taken away from tonight is that we need to do better by people who are coming to this country because they need to escape an unsafe home, or they're coming here to try to build a new business and then help all of us by building a new industry. And the way that we get there is by listening to everyone who's coming to us and finding better ways to get these things done. And we didn't talk about tech as much as I hoped, but one of the things that I think we need to take away is that Vancouver right now has a gap. We've got small companies, startups, we've got big companies like Microsoft and Amazon, but we've got this gap in the middle. And we need a government that's going to build this gap so that the startups have ways to transition into this part of the economy, so that they have ways for their junior staff to move into senior roles, to grow into better professionals, instead of having to move to the United States. That is key. And the new Democratic Party wants to do that for all of us. Thank you.
Thank you. And Hedy?
Well, my takeaway from this is that obviously housing is a major issue for the people on this call. And so, because we hear a lot of questions about housing, I think there were a lot of questions about immigration, which I am taking back from this. I'm hearing some of the concerns that people have. But I thought that there was a variety of issues that came up that interested me, because I think, you know, one of the things that I hear from you are the things that are concerning you. And I think that I want to take that away from this so that I can have a better understanding, because, you know, talking to people, if you talk to a specific sector or group like small businesses or Black businesses or housing folk, you get a specific thing. But when you talk to a broad-based group like this, you get a whole lot of different issues coming up from a totally different perspective, which is kind of interesting to hear. Thank you for that.
Thank you very much. And on behalf of both Tech Talk and Sarai Iran, the hosts of this program, I want to thank both of our candidates, Hedy Fry and Breen Ouellette, and all the participants and your very lively questions that benefited our session. And have fun running out there. And yeah, and don't forget to vote on the 20th. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Shervin. Thank you, Shervin. This session is recorded, and you can find the recording. I'll post it in an hour on YouTube, Instagram, and Facebook. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you very much for the volunteers, the organizers.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye. Thank you.